Welcome, seekers, to today's Satsang, the art of knowing self. Here, we do not seek answers from the mind, but instead, we uncover what has always been present. Today, Dashta will guide us beyond thought, beyond illusion, and into the direct knowing of the self. Let us listen with openness, not to gather more knowledge, but to recognize that which has never left us. And now, we begin.
Dashta, last time you said that knowing does not require proof, while knowledge does. Can you explain how one can experience this knowing directly?
All of our sense perceptions are tied to past experiences. Imagine someone gives you a fruit you have never seen or tasted before. They call an apple and tell you, "Eat this. It is sweet and delicious." At first, you hesitate, but with curiosity, you take a bite. Instantly, you recognize, yes, it is sweet and delicious. From that moment on, whenever you see that type of apple in a market, you remember its taste and confidently buy it. Here, knowledge helps. Knowing the apple's name and taste makes decision-making easy and sound. But now, let us return to knowing the self. We are constantly changing, shaped by our environment and circumstances. These directly influence how we see ourselves. From childhood to old age, we are told who we are, given labels, and conditioned to respond to them. The moment we hear our name or a title assigned to us, we react automatically. Yet, something within us simply observes all of this, silent, unchanged, unaffected by experiences. This unknown observer exists within you, untouched by the labels and the shifting identities. To experience knowing directly, one must let go of all labels. One by one, disconnecting from the things we think we are. Only then do we begin to recognize the knowing that has always been present. We can later explore this through an exercise, so together, we may discover the knowing within you.
Isn't knowledge necessary for life? How can we live without it?
Knowledge is necessary for practical life. It helps us navigate the world, communicate, build, and survive. Without knowledge, we would not know how to plant a seed, drive a car, or even speak a language. But knowledge is only a tool. It is not the essence of life itself. Knowing, on the other hand, is direct. It is not collected from books, not built through memory. It is not secondhand. Let me give you an example. A child learning to ride a bicycle may read about balance and movement, may watch others, and may even listen to instructions. This is knowledge. But the moment the child actually rides the bicycle and feels the balance within, something shifts. That moment is knowing. Life is like this. Knowledge is the signpost that points the way, but it is not the way itself. The mistake we often make is believing that accumulating more knowledge will lead us to truth. But true knowing does not require accumulation. It requires presence. The more we rely on knowledge alone, the further we move from direct experience. So yes, knowledge is necessary for daily life. It helps us do things, make decisions, and function in the world. But knowing is not a tool. It is the unchanging fact, the reality beyond circumstances. Even the example of the child riding a bicycle is subject to change. It can be replaced by another experience, another situation. Our direct experiences in life are a mixture of knowing and knowledge, which creates confusion. We often claim to know something, when in reality, we only possess knowledge of it. However, knowing the self does not follow the same conditions. To live life, you are bound to having knowledge and knowing how to use it for daily existence. But here, we are not talking about knowledge as a means to do things. We are speaking of knowing oneself. This is not something you can read about or gather information on. It is not something you acquire. It is something you are.
But if knowing is beyond thought, how can we even speak about it?
What is thought? Thought is nothing but your past experiences appearing as needed or flowing endlessly like a river. Now, let me ask you, How can you go beyond thought if every thought you have is based on something you have already experienced? It makes me laugh when I hear people using words they do not truly understand. They may assign meaning to them, but that meaning is only based on accumulated knowledge and hearsay. Few actually know the knowing. So, here's a challenge. I ask you to do this right now. Indulge me for a moment. Close your eyes. Clear your mind of passing thoughts. Now, think of something you have never thought about before. Something for which you have no past experience, no prior knowledge. Not the pink elephant that people joke about to trick the mind. I mean something truly unknown to you. Describe it to us. What do you see?
Dashta, I have tried, but everything that comes to my mind is still connected to something I already know.
Exactly. This is the nature of thought. No matter how hard you try, whatever you imagine, whatever you describe, it will always be tied to something you have already experienced, learned, or heard. This is why thought can never take you beyond itself. Thought is bound to time. It moves within the past and projects into the future, but it cannot touch the unknown. The moment you attempt to think of something you have never known, your mind searches through memory, through fragments of past experiences, trying to construct something new. But in reality, it is only rearranging the old. But now, something interesting happens. When you search and search, thought comes to a halt. It stops. The mind becomes clear, silent. Here, you are no longer seeking. You are simply seeing, observing. At this moment, you are not your labels. You are not your past. You are not the future you are building for yourself. You are without thought. And in this state, there is no direction, no movement, yet it is everywhere. Thought is like a chain, binding the pink elephant to the wall. But the wall is only an illusion, and the chain exists only because you believe it does. In this silence, you begin to recognize what has always been here, beyond thought, beyond identity. This is knowing.
Dashta, if knowing is beyond thought, how do we move from knowledge to knowing? Can we practice this?
You cannot practice knowing. Any effort to reach knowing is still an effort of thought, and thought is bound to knowledge. Imagine a man sitting in a boat, rowing hard to reach the shore. But the shore is not something separate from him. It is where he already is. The more he rows, the further he moves from realizing this. If he stops, if he lets go, he sees that there was never a distance to cross. The same is true for knowing. Now, let me ask you, what is the distance between the me and the I? None. There is no distance between them. So, how far do you need to go to reach that which has no distance? Do not confuse the world outside of you with the world within. The world outside, the world without, is three-dimensional. It depends on height, length, and width, all of which are tied to time. But the world within is not limited by these elements. It is not bound by time, and hence it cannot be understood in the same way. To practice something means you have an idea of what you want to achieve at the end. Therefore, there is a beginning and an end, a journey that requires time. But to know the self, this is instant. It is less than a trillionth of a second, not even that. There is no distance to travel, no time required because knowing is already here. The real question is not how to move from knowledge to knowing, but are you willing to stop searching? Are you willing to let go of everything you think you are, everything you have gathered, and simply be? When you are no longer chasing knowing, you will see it has always been here.
Dashta, if knowing is already here, why don't we see it? Why is it so difficult to realize?
See what? What do you want to see? Can you see your feelings? Can you see your thoughts? No, you cannot see when there is no eye to see. The same is true for knowing the self. Your eyes are designed to perceive things bound to three-dimensional elements, things with height, length, and width. But knowing is not something that can be seen or felt. Knowing is the creator of all these elements. A pot of boiling water on a hot stove does not see the fire beneath it. To see the fire, you must become the fire. Only then do you know, not as an idea, not as a belief, but as direct being. And here is the greatest secret. Even the fire does not know that it is fire. It does not call itself fire. It does not try to define itself. It simply is. Knowing does not identify itself as knowing. It is beyond name, beyond form. It is the isness, the presence that has always been. You do not need to see it. You only need to stop looking for it as something separate. It is already what you are.
Dashta, if knowing is already what we are, why do we still feel separate from it? Why does the illusion persist?
Because you believe the illusion. Separation exists only as a thought. It is not real. Imagine a wave in the ocean. The wave rises, moves, and eventually dissolves back into the sea. Now, if the wave had a mind, it might think, I am separate. I am different from the ocean. But is that true? The wave was never separate. It was always the ocean, moving in a particular form. The same is true for you. You believe you are separate because you identify with the form, the body, the name, the mind, the story. But these are just waves on the surface of the vast ocean that you are. Now, look at yourself. You chose the clothing you are wearing now before coming to this satsang. To those who see you, you're the clothing that you wear. If your clothing is expensive and elegant, people react to you with a certain level of respect. They see value in your appearance. The place where you are seated may even change because of how you are dressed. But if you wear poor, torn clothing, the reaction toward you shifts. People respond not to you, but to what you wear. Now tell me, does the person inside the clothing change, or is it only the appearance that changes? You are paying attention to the clothing that knowing is wearing, not to the knowing itself. You believe yourself to be the identity, the labels, the personality. These are just the clothing of knowing. But the self, the one that is, remains unchanged. It is unaware of the circumstances of the life that you are having because it is beyond them. The illusion of separation persists because you mistake the clothing for the one wearing it. The moment you stop identifying with what is temporary, you will recognize what has always been. You are not the clothing. You are not even the one choosing the clothing. You are the knowing that simply is.
Dashta, if the self is beyond thought, beyond form, beyond all experiences, then why do we still suffer? Why does pain and struggle feel so real?
What is suffering? Is suffering the opposite of happiness and enjoyment? We often define our feelings in contrast to one another. To have white, there must be black. Otherwise, why would not be seen? We call something hot only because we know cold. So, you ask, why am I suffering? But I ask you, why not? We are conditioned to create opposites, to name them, and then to react accordingly. The universe itself is bound to coming and going. When something is born, it is magnificent, full of light and wonder. But when it fades, it carries the opposite effect: darkness, sadness, loss. It is the nature of physical existence to go through these cycles, just as day follows night. But ask yourself, what is real? Let me give you an example. I place a cup on the ground and ask you, is this cup real? You will surely say, yes, it is. Now, I remove the cup and place it somewhere else. Then, I point to the empty space where the cup once was and ask you the same question. Is the cup still there? You will surely say no, it is not. Your feelings are like this cup, coming and going, appearing and disappearing. When they are present, they feel real. But the moment they shift, you see that they were never fixed, never permanent. If something is subject to change, can it be the truth? Suffering feels real because you hold on to it as if it is permanent. But just like the cup, it comes and goes. If you stop identifying with it, you will see what remains is beyond suffering. It is the knowing, the presence that does not change. You do not suffer. You only believe you do. We began this conversation with questions. Questions about knowing, thought, suffering, and the nature of the self. But knowing does not come from answers. Knowing is what remains when there are no more questions. You do not need to go anywhere to find it. You do not need time to reach it. It is already here. It has always been here. The mind will continue to search, to seek understanding, to grasp at words and concepts. That is its nature. But what you are is not the mind. It is not thought. It is not the story. Close your eyes. Be still. Let go of everything you think you are. What remains? That which remains without name, without form, without past or future. That is knowing. That is the self. That is the isness. Now, be silent. Not to practice silence, but to be silence. For in this silence, all that is false disappears, and all that is real has never left.
As this satsang comes to an end, remember, the truth is not something to be found, it is something to be realized. Dashta's words are not teachings to hold on to, but pointers to something beyond words. Let go of what is temporary and rest in what is. Knowing is already here. Be still and let it reveal itself. Until we meet again, remain in silence, remain in presence. This is the art of knowing self.